Hey, it's Jordan. Delighted to be joined by Gabriel Shipton, the brother of Julian Assange, who, along with Julian's father, will be making another trip to the United States to fight for his brother's release. Obviously, Julian has been languishing in a UK prison for several years. There's been some developments on the positive end of more high level entities that have been silent finally speaking out. Recently, five major newspapers spoke out, calling for President Biden and the Department of Justice to stop the extradition campaign for Julian Assange. This includes the New York Times, as well as The Guardian, Le Monde, Der Spiegel, and El Pais. So that was big news. Better
Yeah,
late than never, I suppose. There was also a pretty major night carnival recently. Over 2,000 people were out in the UK, right?
yeah. That was in London. So yeah, images of that were sort of beamed around the world. It was quite a good looking and a great turnout. For an evening in London. There's been another another large protest in London in October last year. There was a human chain around Parliament. That's the first time that's ever been done. I think there were estimates of around 10,000 people
Wow.
at that one, and that was people joining hands to, make a human chain around the British Parliament. So the movement to free Julian is growing in the UK. In Australia, uh, it's sort of reached its peak with the Prime Minister. After that New York Times letter to the Garland DOJ, the next day, the Australian Prime Minister came out in the Australian Parliament saying that he'd made representations to the Biden administration, that his words are, enough is enough, and he doesn't see what purpose is served by Julian being in prison. And so the Australian Prime Minister will be in DC in March with the UK Prime Minister, meeting with President Biden for the AUKUS alliance, the Australian UK US alliance. So Australia is, not insignificant in terms of, an alliance with the US, where Australia is a very close ally of the US, very strategically important in the Asia Pacific region. So, I feel that, our Prime Minister coming out and saying, Julian should be free is an important moment as well.
And could you kind of explain, because I certainly don't know, and I'm sure the audience doesn't know Australian politics, but Australia, aside from a couple of your politicians, has not exactly been leading the charge on behalf of Julian. Do you think the prime minister coming out was that prodded by these newspapers or something else?
Yeah, I think definitely it gives cover for these types of people. That to stand behind, or to you can always point to the New York Times and say, well, the New York Times is saying it, so it's it's not as a heavy lift, if you know what I mean, for these politicians to do so. But in Australia, there is overwhelming support for Julian's release among the people. And that is really what's pushing the Prime Minister and so many politicians in Australia to speak out in Julian's defence and to call for his freedom. At the last poll, we were up to, the first one poll at the end of December 21, there's 71% of people in Australia agreed with the statement that Julian should be brought home. The last poll that was done here is 88% of Australians. So it's basically unanimous among the Australian population that that this has to come to a close. They can see the injustice in this, and that's been perpetrated on us, on an Australian. So to Australians, it seems even more unfair, particularly when uh, particularly when the US is one of our closest, US and the UK, who have got who are responsible for this persecution are our closest allies here in Australia. So it is a very stark and very sort of the hypocrisy is quite clear here. But I think what's really interesting is that you have the New York Times, you have all these press freedom institutions and organizations like the ACLU, Human Rights Watch. They did another letter to the Garland DOJ just after the New York Times letter. Didn't get the same amount of press, but that went to the Garland DOJ. That was headed by the CPJ, the Committee to Protect Journalists. So what's interesting is that you have the US Congress that are sort of totally late to the party here. People scratching their head and saying, Congress people going to join the New York Times, going to join all the ACLU, the CPJ, they're going to join, the Australian Prime Minister. So I think everyone's sort of looking around and scratching their heads and saying, what's on the Hill now, and when can we see some action from the US representatives?
Right. And how much of this, obviously you're in Australia, but how much do you think of this is the United Kingdom kind of serving as a proxy and waiting for signals, maybe from the United States, that maybe will late on a Friday night here in the United States, drop the charges? Do you think the United Kingdom? Obviously, this is still being reviewed. It's kind of a complicated process because originally, Judge Barrister in the UK had ruled that Julian would not be extradited, citing the very unsafe U.S. prisons. But then she was overruled, and now it's being reviewed at the highest level. But do you think the United Kingdom is kind of waiting for signals from the United States?
Well, so Julian has an application in to appeal, and that's his last effort in the UK High Courts. So, the Home Secretary, which is basically the Secretary of State of the UK, signed off on the extradition last June, June 17. She signed off, and Julian appealed that decision, and it is an application to appeal, and the High Court has an opportunity, either to give leave to appeal so they can have a hearing, or they can reject the appeal. And if they reject the appeal, Julian could be extradited, imminently. And it's this sort of weird situation now where they've had, I think, 3 months to decide. Since the beginning of November, the High Court in the UK have had everything they need to decide on whether they hear this application. And I'm saying this because it sort of points to what you're talking about, that there could potentially be, are they waiting for something? Are they waiting for some political situation to change, or are they waiting for some sort of signal from the US or from Australia that that this is going to end, or this has to move forward? So it is these times are very difficult for Julian, because you have a situation where this extradition could be imminent. It could happen. The High Court could make their decision, and he could be on a plane. And having that hanging over your head, and for Julian's young family, having that hanging over their head is a very trying and very anxious time to be potentially extradited to a country whose intelligence organization, the CIA, made sketches and plans to murder Julian, and also plots to kill him, as well as recording all his meetings with his lawyers and doctors while he was in the Ecuadorian embassy. So that's the sort of situation that Julian's in, and it's very hard at the moment. Yeah.
And that's always been the most incredible thing, that just to a outside person, common sense perspective, you would think it would be pretty pretty important in legal proceedings, add value, admissible, the fact that credible reporting came out that this was a political retaliation, that under the Trump administration, his CIA was plotting to kidnap and assassinate Julian. But it seems, at least in the UK's proceedings, that was never taken into consideration.
Yeah, that's right. I think the judge made when they brought it up last, I think the judge made some comment. Well, of course they wanted to. It was a comment like that. So, and it just points to the political nature of this persecution. And in the UK, there's even the extradition treaty says you can't be extradited for a political charge, and espionage is inherently political. And these other factors and reporting that has come in has shown that. And I think I don't want to promote his book, but Mike Pompeo had a book come out a couple of weeks ago, and he had a few pages on Julian in his book that devoted to his pursuit of Julian, and sort of claiming credit for this indictment, saying that he was pushing the DOJ to indict Julian and go full steam ahead with this prosecution, that he was actively lobbying Ecuador to kick Julian out of the embassy, which he stated in his book was eventually successful. So that's, I think an admission by Pompeo that he is sort of the one who was behind this prosecution being so active, really in the face of the independence of the DOJ that the Biden administration has been so vocal about, that the DOJ is totally independent. So, but when you have a prosecution that Pompeo has admitted that he pushed this prosecution as CIA director, as head of the State Department, that he pushed this prosecution onto the DOJ, then there should be no reason for the Biden administration to continue it. It's obviously political. It's obviously a political persecution pushed by, self-admittedly pushed by Mike Pompeo.
Right. And also, it's kind of hollow when you hear so much from Biden, from Democrats in America, about the threat against democracy that was posed by the last president, citing January 6th and many other things, which, is credible. But, the guardians of democracy in America, according to the elite, are the New York Times and these other legacy outlets. And they're saying that this is a threat against democracy, prosecuting Julian Assange. But it seems to be falling on deaf ears. The obvious question connected to what we just talked about in the CIA is, do you think that Biden, obviously you can't get in his head, but that Biden is at the mercy of, kind of America's military establishment that hates your brother for what he exposed and, wants him to pay? Obama did the right thing with not prosecuting him, but CIA, FBI saw their opportunity when kind of a puppet like Trump came in. Do you think that is why Biden is proceeding with this, kind of doing what the intelligence machine wants him to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are definitely elements within the intelligence community that are pushing it. I also know that there are elements that are against this prosecution. This isn't an open and closed case. We know. I think of that are the leaks that came out that were the basis of this Yahoo News investigation. Those leaks against the CIA and the intelligence community, saying that is a real sign that, okay, step here. There are people within these organizations that see this prosecution as an overstep, and for what it is. It's an attack on the First Amendment, an attack on a free press, which is an essential part of a working democracy. So, I have faith that there are, even though there are some forces that are really out to get Julian. We know that they want him dead, right? Like it's not like they want him to rot away in a prison cell, but we know that they had made plans and sketches to kill him. So, but we also know that there are some elements within these organizations that really care about the Constitution. They really care about democracy, and so we hope those elements win out over the other ones. But yeah, there are definitely powerful forces behind this who need convincing that this is going to really damage the democratic system in the US. And they need to hear that from their colleagues, from people in Congress, from the New York Times, from all these organizations. Otherwise, this will never come to an end.
And it's a dumb question, but how is he doing? Obviously, he's been in prison and in an embassy now for over a decade. So reports of obviously his physical health, his mental health suffering. Have you spoken with your brother recently, and how is he holding up?
Well, my dad speaks to him. I haven't spoken to him for a while. I saw him at the end of October in the prison. It's a very, very oppressive place. And he's has an amazing fighting spirit. I can't believe that he's still in there. I'm still thinking about how he's going to fight this, and yeah, I'm always amazed at his resilience under duress, and it's been, I think, 13 years since he was originally detained in the UK, so he hasn't known freedom for 13 years. I think things like, you think, well, you look around in the world and you see, well, what has changed in those 13 years? And Julian hasn't even been to the supermarket, in 13
Right.
years. He hasn't, in 11 years, he hasn't seen a blade of grass. And so, yeah, he's suffering, and I just hope he can make it through this. That's what I hope he can hold on, because we're going to win, and he's going to get out. But I just hope it's not before it's too late.
And what do you need from? Obviously, it's an international effort, but since you and your father are doing an American tour, what are you asking from his supporters here in the States? How could they support as you guys come over here?
Yeah, well, come and join us on our tour. I think we're going to 25 cities now across the US. We have around 40 events, adding more on each day, and find out we're touring with Ithaca, which is a documentary that I produced about my family's fight to free Julian. And yeah, we're playing all across the country. You can go to ithacamovie.com to find out the schedule there of where we'll be. So come down and say hello. I always, always really, the American people are very warm and hospitable, and we spend a lot of time being critical of your government, but whenever we come over there, it's we're always welcomed with open arms. So yeah, come down and see us, say hello. You can ithacamovie.com, or you can go to assangedefense.org, which has all information about campaigns, and sign up for their email. We will get information on events around the country, different protests, actions, talks, and things that are going on. At the moment, specifically asking people to contact their Congress, their representatives, essentially. Give your representatives a call, particularly in the Progressive Caucus. We've heard murmurs of some action coming from the Progressive Caucus. So yeah, now would be a great time to give your congressperson a call and just, I think it's a pretty simple ask. Why aren't you, the New York Times is calling for this to come to a close. The CPJ, the ACLU, all those human rights, Amnesty, all these human rights organizations, 23 of them, I think there are. Why aren't you saying something as well?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for taking the time. Obviously, this, it's been very hard on you. Julian's wife, should mention, he hasn't been able to raise his children. So, yeah, thank you. And yeah, look forward to hopefully seeing you while you're in the States.
Thanks, Jordan.